Hi, in this video we're continuing from where we left off with regard to the SSIS packages. So if you remember from the last video, what we did was we create an SSIS package to call a web service and upload some data into a database and essentially just format the data, things like that. So once that's done, what we'll have is for all purposes really just a database that's like got one table in it for the moment. So you'll see that we've got like one table. It's got a list of information regarding the airports in different countries, right? So the next step that I want to do is I want to show you a very nice reporting tool called Power BI or PowerView basically. And the intention here is that a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that Microsoft has actually been making sincere efforts to kind of improve the reporting aspects of the entire data platform, so to speak. So initially we had reporting services, which obviously wasn't obviously a very great tool to do visual representation of data. It did have a very basic charting and grid layout functionality, but it wasn't really something that you want to show to end users. It was great for things that you wanted to do internally, but not really something that I guess you could say you want to show to clients. So from there, then they went ahead and acquired Dundas charts, and they tried to go ahead and improve the visualization and charting controls within reporting services. But I guess by that time it was too late. So now what they're doing is essentially they're trying to give the entire concept of self-service BI another push by actually integrating reporting services or reporting within the Excel or the Office framework. So a typical example, as you can see here in this scenario, is that I've got actually Power Pivot as well as Power View installed in my Excel. It's easy enough download. It's all free, so you don't really need to worry about licensing and things like that. So if you just go to Google and download Power View, for example, for Excel. It's just a plugin that you need to download and install, so you'll see that you can just download it from here. PowerView, Power Pivot, Power BI, all these are actually just variations of the reporting or the presentation layer that Microsoft is exposing. So sometimes you can use it with Excel, you can use it with SharePoint, and even there's an online version called Power BI for Office 365. Right, so it's really convenient for those who have different needs in terms of reporting. So you'll see that we've got some fancy looking graphs and charts here, which we'll get to in a minute. So you can just download it from here, and obviously you got the Power BI for Office 365, which is also a very useful. Well, what do you know? You may have clicked on the old link, so it looks like there's something wrong here with this particular link, but there is Office 365 Power BI. So if you just do powerbi.microsoft.com, I guess, yeah, you can go to this link, and you can even go ahead and integrate Power BI as a web application. Right, so this doesn't require SharePoint, but the intention here being that you can use it to go ahead, connect to a data source and fetch data. So a lot of clients of mine use this in a couple of different ways, sometimes to connect to an in-house or on-premise system, as well as to connect to the cloud or Azure basically, and then fetch the data over the network that ways. So this way you actually have an online portal which opens up pretty much anywhere, right? For my example that I'm going to show in this video, I'm going to stick to using Excel. So you'll see that once you install PowerView or Power Pivot, you'll actually need to come into the add-ins over here. Yeah. So just a second, let me just go ahead and click add-ins. Yeah, just okay. So let me just save this, and I'll actually show you the add-ins in a minute. I've got the PowerView tab open at the moment, so it's not really showing me the add-ins. Yeah. So options, yeah, and under options you have add-ins, and you'll see that these are the list of add-ins that you have. So what you need to do is basically you need to take your add-in and enable it. It's disabled by default, so you'll see that I've already got Power Map, Power View, and Power Pivot enabled. So all these three are actually downloadable off the internet. You can just Google it, and you'll get it. Yeah, these are again COM objects, so you need to go ahead and click the COM add-ins. Yeah, and you'll see them here, so you can just check the box and press OK, at which point it gets activated. Yeah. To start off, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a new session or a new workbook inside which I want to create my Power BI reports. So you'll see that initially I need a Power Pivot, or I need data fetched off the database. So I'm going to use Power Pivot. I'm going to click Manage. Yeah, and when I click manage under databases, you'll see you got the different options. So I'm going to select my SQL Server database, which is this one here. So let me just go ahead and put that in. And in there I've got a database called ETL test, which is the one that contains my airports information. So you'll see that there's a list of tables, or I can write a query. In my case, I just want the data of the single table called airport, so I'm going to select that and press finish. Yeah. And when I do that, you'll see that there's like 2416 rows fetched, and that's what you see here. So you'll see that this is all the information that we imported using the SSIS package. So I've got the code, I've got the airport city or the name of the airport, the country, abbreviation of the country code, offsets in terms of Greenwich Mean Time, runway lengths. You'll see that there is some issues with the data. Some runways only have a length of 0, whereas others would have slightly longer runways. You can see here 6,000 feet, 4,000 feet. And then you got the elevation and the position of the airport with regard to geographic coordinates, right? So this is what we have. Now the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and plot this information on a report or a graph, right? So at this point I'm not really doing anything with the data, so I'll just leave it as it is and I'll press save, and I'll save it somewhere on my desktop. And once that's done, if you have PowerView enabled, or if you have PowerView ready and running on your system, then when you click insert, you'll actually see this tab here called PowerView. It's not the same as all the other stuff which you've already been seeing since before PowerView was available. So when you click PowerView, what happens is that you get this interface or a design layer. There's a design structure where you can drag and drop stuff. So this is again something that I see on forums very regularly in terms of how do I allow my user to go ahead, drag and drop fields and create their own reports. So my first suggestion usually is to go ahead and use Report Builder or SSRS, and if that's not an option, then obviously PowerView is definitely a good solution there as well. So in this case, as you can see, the first thing we need to do is kind of create the data set that we want to work with. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I need the country code. Yeah, and along with the country code, I want a count of actually not the country code, but what I would like is to kind of show a distribution of number of airports by country. So I'll remove the field from here and I'll use the country abbreviation. I've made a mistake there in terms of spelling, but I guess you get the point. So the next thing I want to do is I want to count the number of airports. So you'll see that if I just drag country code, it's summarizing by non-blank. So you'll see that the US has about 2,000 airports compared to 126 and in India and 137 in China. So the idea is essentially just to give you a rough distribution of the number of airports. So now that I have this data, obviously this is finally just the representation of how many airports are there in a country. But what I would like to do is kind of show that information in a way that makes more sense. So if I go ahead and just click on the map on the top under design, when I click map, you'll see that that table gets converted into something that's a little bit more user friendly from the end user perspective. So you can simply go ahead and when you click map, you'll see that it translates the country code short form into the fully expanded country, and that way you're able to see the distribution of the airports by different countries. Yeah. So this is obviously just a very basic example of what you can do. I'll show you another example where I'll go ahead create another data set where what I would like to do is kind of, I don't know, see the number of airports by country and by the time zones in the country. So for example, if you're in the United States, I'd like to see how many airports typically you would find in, say, East Coast versus West Coast, or Alaska or Hawaii for that example. Yeah, so I've gone ahead and dragged the data. I'll go ahead and put in the country code here as well. So the intention here being that by doing this, I'm distributing the data, right? So I want to summarize this by non-blank. So you'll see that in China, you got these countries. Obviously, there are some mistakes in the data, so I want to filter it. So what I'll do is I'll expand this, and under GMT offset, I would like to see only cases where there are GMT offsets available. So blank is not a GMT offset. So once that's done, what I'd like to do is I'd like to represent this in a way that's more user friendly. So what I'll do is I'll take this graph over here, and I'll go ahead and, or I'll take this table and I'll convert it into maybe a column chart, right? So I'll call it a stacked column chart. Yeah, and you can see here at this point it kind of differentiates between the the different time zones in the airport. So what I'll do next is I'd like to see the numbers against these values. So I'll come over here to layout, and you'll see that we've got data labels there. So if I click show, it'll actually show me the number of airports. So if you come back to our PowerView sheet, if I just minimize this, you'll see that we've got these guys here. So I'd like to see the data labels for these as well. So I'll just go ahead and put them below. Yeah, actually that's not the data label, that's the country code itself. Yeah, so well, this probably is not the best layout to use here for this one. So let me just go ahead and choose roadmap background. Yeah, much better. Yeah, I'd also like to maybe get rid of this title on the top and replace it with something that's a bit more user friendly. So the other thing that you might want to notice here is that you can actually interact with the map, so you can actually zoom in and get more and more details. So this actually is a really powerful way to visualize certain information from a geographic standpoint. So you can actually zoom in and show a lot more detail than what would be available directly right off the bat. Okay. So coming back here with this particular chart that we have here, you'll see that we've got actually the representation here. So I guess the best thing would be to kind of show this information in a separate PowerView sheet. So I'll just go ahead, click PowerView here, and paste this in here so that we can actually see the distribution. However, you'll see that there's a huge difference between the number of airports in these two geographies, in the United States versus the rest of the world. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and make it 100% stacked column so that you can kind of see the distribution a little bit better. Right off the bat, I guess the data makes sense. US obviously has 4 different time zones, so you'll see that there's 4 major chunks here, and then it's obviously got some other airports in different parts of the world and islands and stuff like that. So that's what we're seeing here in terms of the US having airports spread across multiple time zones. Whereas in India, you'll notice that we've got mainly just 3 time zones here. So I guess if you hover over the first one, it'll kind of give you an idea about the. So you got -6, 5.5, which is 5 hours and 30 minutes, and then you got 5 hours plus 5.5. So again, I guess this last one is basically just an issue with the data. So this is another way that you can go ahead and do the representations of the data itself inside Power BI. So you'll see that it's actually pretty easy to work with this information inside of Power BI, and that's really the big advantage that you get when you're working with Power BI. Yeah, so you can see when you click on it, it'll actually highlight and show you the details so that you can actually focus on certain aspects. A nice way that this actually works out is, for example, if I go ahead and do it a little bit like this, where I'll create not airport code, but I'll say maybe abbreviation of the country followed by the GMT offset, and then let's say a count of the country code. I don't have a count column as yet in the data set, so that's why I have to go ahead and use a count of some other column. Yeah, but if you see here, what's happening is that this particular set at this moment is kind of on its own. Yeah, and if I click the US over here, you'll see that it automatically filters the data at the bottom half. So you'll see here now country abbreviation just contains the data for the US, and similarly if I go ahead click Germany, or if I click India, you'll see that the data filters for that particular geography. So the entire report itself, or at least all the data in one PowerView sheet, kind of is interactive with itself. Obviously you'll notice that what I do here doesn't have any impact on what goes on in the second sheet, so the second sheet remains fairly static. Yeah, so there is a lot of clicking that you can do here to kind of really get a kind of interactive experience with Power BI. To kind of show you what else you can do, I've just gone ahead and created some basic reports and charts of the airport's information, but I've done it using the same process that we just used, but I'll just show it to you real quick just so you have an idea. And the first one is obviously the map control that I've just shown you, and the rest of it, as you'll see, is also fairly straightforward. It's all just dragging and dropping, so there's really not much to explain here. It's all about just exploring by doing more than anything else. You'll see that I've got all my airport data here, and what I've done is I've actually gone into my PowerPoint data, and I've categorized runways by different lengths so that any runway less than 3,000 feet is considered to be a bush, or basically a very small runway. Then you got the commercial runways, which are excess of, I guess, 7,000 feet, and anything in between is what we would call a domestic airport. So the way I've done that is if I go into Power Pivot and I click Manage, I actually have the ability to go ahead and modify my data set and add stuff to it to enrich the data, so to speak. So if I come over here, you'll see that I've created a column called airport type, which doesn't actually exist in my database. It's something that I'm creating within the Excel or the PowerView. So you'll see the formula here. Basically, I'm saying if the value of the runway exceeds 3,000 feet, then it's commercial. Else, if it's less than 1,000 feet, it's a bush, and everything else is obviously domestic. And then I've gone ahead and converted the runway into the runway length from X number of feet into its thousands representation. So you'll see that I've got runway height and length represented into segments of 1,000. The reason I did that is because I wanted to quickly show you something. So if I close this, come back here, you can see that runway to elevation, where what I'm doing is I'm using a scatter plot, and in my scatter plot what I'm really doing is just showing a distribution of runway length to elevation. So you'll see that the runway length is the x-axis and the elevation is the y-axis, and you'll see that it's fairly accurate from a geographical standpoint, because the one that you see here, which stands out very far away in India, is actually the airport in Leh, which is a mountainous region in the Himalayas. So you'll see that the higher you go, the longer the runway needs to be, which makes sense considering that the air is thinner. For China, obviously, you'll see that we have some issues with the data because there's not a lot of information regarding the airports in China. And in the US, you'll see that typically the smaller airports are towards the non-mountainous regions. So you'll see that runways with shorter lengths typically are found closer to sea level, and the higher up you go, obviously you have more runways. You'll also notice that we've got a set of runways here which is fairly high and sufficiently big, considering that it's not fitting the pattern of the rest of them, and these are actually airports that are found in Colorado and the other hilly regions of the US. Germany, you can see that it's fairly flat because there's not really a lot of elevation as far as runways are concerned. And then in India, again, you'll see the same distribution similar to that of the US. So this kind of gives you an idea about the representation or how the data would look like. There is one other nice feature that I want to show you, and that would be basically if I just go ahead here, you can see that I've taken each country and made it its own block. But I can also go ahead and put it on the play axis. Now this is not really a perfect example, but it should give you a good idea about how this thing works. So you'll see that when I click when I drag and drop it here, I've got a play button here right now. Normally we put a date in this particular region so that you can see the distribution or the scatter by date, but I'm just putting in a country here so that you can see the distribution. So you'll see that as we go from China to Denmark to India to US, you'll see how the graph kind of changes, and that's something that's very useful when you're trying to do a time-based analysis of the data. And last but not least, we have the runway by time zone, which is again just the previous diagram or the previous chart that I had shown you in Power BI, where you can see the distribution of runways to kind of get an idea about which parts of the country actually have a shortage or excess of runways. So this is, I guess, the East Coast, and this is Alaska, and this is the West Coast. So it came as a bit of a shock to me that there are more airports in Alaska than there are on the West Coast, but I guess because of the vastness of Alaska, probably the frequent mode of transportation there is actually aircraft. So that's what it is really. You can do a lot of analysis using Power BI. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to let me know if you need any other information. Thanks for watching.